Hey there, welcome back to my YouTube channel. And I just want to say that yes, I've been gone for a few weeks and it just has been a lot. I realized that I needed to take a mental health break because of everything that has been happening in the United States of America. It was September of 2025. No need to go into details, but so much had happened during that month that I just decided, you know what, I need to take a break. Let's regroup and we'll come back and record. So, as promised, I am here today to talk about my experience with the fertility clinic and seeing a fertility specialist for the first time. Let me just do some preliminary things. First, I got my Stitch shirt on and it says I tried, which is very befitting for our conversation today. I tried in my fertility process. I also have this little dot on my nose. I know that I probably shouldn't draw attention to it, but it is annoying me and I look like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, but I'm still cute. So without further ado, let's get into today's topic where I'll be sharing my journey of going to the fertility specialist. If this is something that you're interested in, stick around and keep watching. So in February of 2025, at that time I was cleared by my OBGYN to go and see a fertility specialist. So I went on Google and searched for a fertility clinic in my area. I found one that I thought seemed to be good. I called them to see if they took my insurance, and they did. So I scheduled my first appointment, and that was set for the end of March. So I went into that initial appointment and I met with my doctor for the first time, and I gave her kind of like a brief history of my infertility, and I told her about my history with PCOS when I was diagnosed. I told her, how my numbers had improved over the last year or so, and that's what prompted me to come and see a fertility specialist. I also explained at that time that my husband and I had been trying for more than a year and we had not yet conceived. And just FYI, if you've been trying to conceive for less than a year, they probably will tell you to keep trying until it's been more than a year and come back after that point. So we got all of that out of the way, and my doctor then explained to me um, pretty much the treatment plan, what would happen next. So my doctor kind of explained to me what the process would be for me moving forward. And of course, I would have to do diagnostic testing, which is all the blood work, the procedures, and ultrasounds before we get started. And then she explained that we would try three medicated cycles before moving on to a more intense treatment. So what she suggested was that I do letrozole and timed intercourse for 2 cycles. If I haven't gotten pregnant by those 2 cycles, on the third cycle I would do the medication, which is the letrozole, and an IUI procedure. And then after that, if we were still not successful, we would look into more intense treatment for fertility. So I left that appointment feeling really hopeful and really confident because my doctor was basically telling me, yeah, you'll be pregnant in no time as long as everything checks out with your diagnostic testing. And she was really confident that I wouldn't even have to get to the point of IUI, that I probably would conceive within the first or second cycle. So I am excited. I'm ready to start this process. So we roll around to April, and that is when I have my first appointment for my diagnostics testing. So April 10th, I was scheduled to come in and have an SIS procedure, and I'll put that on the screen. So the SIS is basically when they insert a tube up in through the vaginal canal up into your uterus, and they put a clear fluid up there that kind of bubbles up. And on the ultrasound, they're able to see more clearly how your uterus is looking. They're looking at, for this procedure, they're looking to see if you have any polyps in your uterus, to see if your uterine lining is good. So that was that procedure, and let me tell you, it was excruciating. I was in so much pain during the procedure and after the procedure. Oh my God, I was crippled over in pain after that procedure. So then I also at that appointment got blood work done, and in that blood work, I'm getting STD test done. I am getting all of my blood work, all of the values that they normally check for your blood. And the next day, April 11th, I was scheduled to have what's called an HSG. So, in doing my research before all of this, and I think this is helpful if you are interested in going through this process, I researched the SIS procedure, the HSG procedure, and what I found was everyone was saying the HSG procedure is so painful, it hurts so bad, and the SIS procedure is nothing, it's cakewalk, it doesn't hurt. I had the opposite experience. So my SIS procedure, as I explained to you guys, was excruciating. The next day I go in for my HSG procedure, and the HSG is pretty much similar to the SIS in that they're going through the vaginal canal. They are putting a tube up there. This time they're inserting a dye instead of clear fluid up into your uterus and through your fallopian tube. So this dye is designed to go all the way through. And what they're checking for here is to make sure that your fallopian tubes are not blocked, that everything is clear, and that you're good to go. Um, and then in May, my husband was actually scheduled to have his diagnostic test done. And his diagnostic test, obviously, is a semen analysis. There was some issues with insurance in May where it took them longer than it should have to approve his semen analysis through insurance. So that boiled over into June. So now we're at the top of June. He has his procedure done. And by the way, we can't go back for the follow up appointment until all of my diagnostics tests are completed and until my husband has completed the semen analysis. So I've done all of my work in April. May he was supposed to have his work done. It didn't happen. So now we're in June. He has it done. Everything is going well, and I go into my follow up appointment now that I have all of my diagnostics tests done. Oh, and by the way, they also suggested at the time that my husband did the semen analysis that we do genetic testing, which we opted out of because there was an out of pocket cost associated with that of between $300 and $600, and we just didn't think that it was necessary. So we opted out of the genetic testing. So I go in to my follow up appointment with the fertility specialist after I've had all of the procedures done, all of the blood work done. So we review my results essentially. And she basically said everything looks good. So I want to go over some of my numbers. Obviously, my STD results were clear. And just a side note, if you have an STD at the time you're trying to go through fertility treatment, they will advise you to treat, or they will require you to treat the STDs before you move forward. So you have to be clear there. Another number that stood out to me was the AMH level. So AMH is the level that they test to see what your ovarian reserve or your egg reserve is. So generally, a normal range for an AMH is between 3 and 5. My AMH level was a 10.5, so almost double, or actually double the normal range. And I was kind of worried about that, but my doctor reassured me that that's fine. It's actually normal for women with PCOS to have higher AMH levels. And actually, my blood work before I started getting healthy, my AMH level was even higher. I think it was like a 26. So we're down to a 10, which is really good. And she also reassured me that this is a good sign. It means that I have lots of eggs on reserve, which is needed when you're going through a fertility process. So that was good. She also talked about my A1C. My A1C at that time was a 6.0, and I was actually happy about that because I knew the last time I had blood work, it was actually a 6.5, and that was when I was released from my endocrinologist. So I had told her that because she was kind of concerned there because there are some risks associated with diabetics and pre-diabetics when we talk about pregnancy. So she kind of explained that, and she was like, okay, well, since your numbers are going down, that's great. Everything is fine there. Just keep doing what you're doing. And that's what I did. So, my A1C was good. My HSG test, which was the one where they insert the dye up through the fallopian tube, that came back clear. So, interesting thing, when I was having this HSG, I actually felt the dye go all the way up and through my fallopian tubes, which it felt really, really interesting. So my HSG test, that came back clear. My fallopian tubes were clear and open. The SIS test came back clear. My uterus looks really healthy and good. Everything was clear there. So I was really hopeful again after this appointment with the doctor. She cleared me to go ahead and start with my first round of letrozole, or my first medicated cycle, which I was very excited about. And she kind of explained how that process works. And then, so essentially, you go in for baseline testing, and then once everything is clear with your baseline testing, they'll tell you to start the medication, and then you come in for a follow-up testing after the medication and after you've done timed intercourse to see how everything went. So now we're going to get into what it was like for me during cycle 1 of letrozole. I'll take a sip. So, letrozole cycle 1. Very interesting. Okay, and so what happened? So after my initial appointment with the fertility specialist, I was told to give them a call on day 1 when my period starts to schedule my first appointment for the baseline testing. So my period started June 24th, and I gave them a call on that day, and they scheduled me for appointment 2 days later on June the 26th. So at that appointment, I got blood work done, and I also got another ultrasound done. So that blood work, they tested my progesterone levels, my estrogen levels, and my HCG levels. And what that turned out to be was that my progesterone was less than zero point 0.5. So less than zero point 0.5 at this point in the cycle is pretty good. Early in your cycle, your progesterone levels are low, and then they slowly start to increase throughout your cycle. My estrogen levels were at a 26, which is also relatively low, and that's expected at this time in the cycle. Of course, they did an HCG test, or a blood pregnancy test, and of course, they have to make sure that that's negative before you start fertility treatment. And then I did my ultrasound, and in the ultrasound, what they're checking for is your endometrial thickness. So at my baseline, my endometrial thickness was at a 4.0 millimeter, which is where you want it to be at that point in your cycle. So your uterine lining should be thinner because you're actually shedding that lining during your period. So it's actually that was actually a good number. And so she told me to go ahead and start taking the medication. So letrozole is a fertility medication that I was prescribed, and I was told to start taking it on cycle day 3, and for the next once a day for the next 5 days. So I take the medication. and it's going well. And they at my last appointment, they scheduled me for my next appointment. So at the end of every appointment, they schedule the following appointment, and all of this is timed with your cycle. So my next appointment was scheduled for cycle day 12, which would have been July the 5th. On July the 5th, they wanted to see whether I responded to the letrozole. So at this point, I've taken the letrozole for 5 days. I'm done with that. I come in and they do an ultrasound, and what they're checking for is to see if I had any follicles that matured, and they're also checking my uterine lining or endometrial thickness once again. So when they went in on my left ovary, I had a 24.6 millimeter follicle, which is very mature. A normal range for a mature follicle is between 18 and 24. Anything less than 18 would indicate that the follicle is not mature enough, and anything more than 24 would indicate that the follicle is over mature and the egg would be overripe. So what happens in this process is that your follicle begins to, over the course of your cycle, from day one moving forward, your follicles start to develop, and then you develop one follicle that grows faster than the others and becomes a dominant follicle. So that dominant follicle develops and matures and gets to the right size. And then when the time is right, that follicle will there will be follicle stimulating hormones released, and that follicle will rupture and release an egg. And that egg then is there available waiting for it to be fertilized. So what happens with PCOS is that you don't ovulate properly. So you get to the point where the follicles are starting to grow, but you don't develop a healthy, mature, dominant follicle. So you have a bunch of little follicles that develop, and none of them develop enough to stimulate ovulation. So you don't ovulate, but you end up with a bunch of these little follicles that develop over time, which actually are cysts, which hence the name is PCOS, or polycystic ovaries. Um, so I actually did have the mature follicle, like I'm explaining. On my right ovary, though, I had three little small ones that were less dominant. So because I had the mature follicle, my at that appointment, they confirmed that I can move forward and take the Overdrill shot or the trigger shot. So the Overdrill is they only clear you for this step if you have a mature and dominant follicle that is ready to release an egg. If at this point you didn't respond to the medication and your follicle did not grow, then you don't move forward to the next step to take the Overdrill shot. So I got to the next step, took the Overdrill shot, and you take that the same day as the appointment. So on July 5th, I took the Overdrill shot, and that is basically you're injecting hormones that would stimulate that follicle to rupture and release the egg. Another thing that happens in PCOS, like I explained, is that you don't rupture, so the egg is never released. So this trigger shot is to make sure that that follicle ruptures and the egg is then released. And so when you take the Overdrill shot, it is expected that you'll ovulate or release that mature egg within 24 to 36 hours after taking the shot. So at that appointment where they confirmed that I should take the shot, they also said that they told me when to have intercourse. So that day, July 5th, I was to take the trigger shot and have intercourse that day and every other day after that during my fertile window, which we did. So everything went well there. And then we get to, sorry, if I'm looking down, I'm looking at my notes because this is a lot. These are a lot of numbers and values. So that was July 5th. July 11th, we're now at cycle day 18. I have another appointment, and I come in just so that they can do a blood test to test my progesterone levels. So at this point, if you recall, my progesterone levels at baseline were at zero point 0.5. At this point, they want to see that my progesterone levels have risen And so mine were a 13.5. Ideally, they like them to be at 15, but they did reassure me that 13.5 is still good. It still indicates that ovulation did in fact happen. So you want to see that rise in progesterone, and that usually is an indicator that you did ovulate. So that happened on cycle day 18. So I was excited to know that I actually did ovulate. That was very, very exciting for me. But I was kind of concerned at this point too, because they want you to see your progesterone levels at 15. Again, I'm at a 13.5. So I was a little nervous there. And that's when a little bit of doubt started to creep in, but I'm still feeling hopeful, and they recommended me to go ahead and take some what they call progesterone vaginal suppositories. And that is to make sure that your progesterone levels continue to rise. So you remember at the beginning, I told you your progesterone levels at the top of your cycle should be low and they slowly increase over time. So if you were to turn out pregnant, your progesterone levels would spike and they would go even higher. But if they're not seeing that, it could be concerning in a fertility process. So they had me take these suppositories to increase my progesterone levels. And what this does is your uterine lining needs to be thick enough, right? So that the egg can implant into your uterus. And there is a correlation there between your progesterone levels and the thickness of your uterine lining, right? So if my uterine lining isn't thick enough for the egg to implant, that could cause a miscarriage. So we don't know what happened at this point in the cycle. So as a precaution, they have you to take these suppositories. Quite annoying because you have to insert them vaginally in the morning when you wake up and at night before you go to bed, and you have to lay down for an hour before getting up. So quite an annoying process. So we did that, and they schedule at this time on cycle day 18, they scheduled an appointment for the next week at cycle day 25. So that would have been July 18th. And at this appointment, this is my last appointment of the cycle. And at this appointment, they would check my progesterone levels. They're also going to do my estrogen levels and check my HCG. Before I get into what the results were of that, I want to talk about some of the costs associated with all of this. So the every cycle that you do, there is a mandatory $250 non-refundable fee per cycle that is not covered through insurance, so it's an out-of-pocket cost. And then you have the medication. So I had Letrozole, which was about $5, so my insurance covered that. And then I had the Overdrill shot. The Overdrill shot was, I believe, $107. And then because they had to deliver it from the next city over, it was a $10 delivery fee for a total of $117. And then the progesterone suppositories that I had to take, those were less than $20. I can't remember the exact amount. On top of that, I also had a couple of visits, as you can tell, to the doctor's office. But 5 of those visits, I did have to pay a $10 copay. I'm not complaining about a $10 copay, trust me. But that would add $50 more to my total. So in total for this cycle, I spent about $442, which is not bad. It could be worse, honestly, but those were the costs associated with this process. Cycle day 25, I get my blood work done, like I explained. My progesterone level went up from a 13.5 to a 17.7. And remember, during that time, I was taking progesterone suppositories, so it is expected that my progesterone would rise. So my progesterone went up slightly. My estrogen, if you remember, my baseline estrogen was a 26, and at the end of the cycle, it is 151. So that rose as expected. And then they did an HCG test, or a blood pregnancy test. And so how this happened was they gave me a call, and it was just random. And they basically were like, hey Amber, I just wanted to give you your results. And mind you, none of this process, they call me and give me my results. Everything is uploaded in the portal. But at the end of the cycle, they're calling to give you your results over the phone. So she basically told me what my levels were, and she said my HCG test was negative, which I kind of felt. So if you remember when I told you guys that I kind of felt discouraged when I seen my progesterone levels at cycle day 18 when it was a 13.5, and they liked it to be a 15 or higher. At that point, I had already started coaching myself that it didn't happen this cycle. It's okay. We're not going to get emotional. We're just going to try again. And I had really coached myself, but I got the call and she tells me that it's negative, and I get emotional. And I'm like, Lord, why am I emotional? I already anticipated this. But that just goes to show that this process, I mean, the amount of times that you go to the doctor and get blood work done and get tests done, and the up and down of it all, it is emotionally taxing. And I was, at the end of that cycle, I was this close to saying I quit, but my husband really encouraged me, and we decided to try another cycle of medication with Letrozole. So I was like, okay, and I was able to really work through my emotions and pull myself up by my bootstraps and keep it moving. So in my next video, I want to talk to you guys about Letrozole cycle 2. But this cycle was a lot for me, you guys, and I appreciate you guys. If you're stuck around to this point in the video, I appreciate you guys for sticking around, for hearing out my story. I'm really just here because I want to document this, and hopefully this will help someone else who's considering going through this process, who is going through this process. I know that it's difficult, I know it's hard, but it's something that some of us girls with PCOS have to do if we want to see the miracle on the other side of this. So I appreciate your time, and thank you so much for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and I look forward to seeing you in my next video. See you later. Bye-bye.